Winding along the crest of the Appalachian Mountains lies a trail, some 2,034 miles from Mount Katahdin, Maine, through 14 states to Springer Mountain, just north of Atlanta. We call it the Appalachian Trail. The trail wanders through 4 states that share a common history and a common bond, the Appalachian Mountains. Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee make up a vast area that stretches westward from the Atlantic Ocean to the banks of the muddy Mississippi. It is a land full of surprises, magnificent vistas, mystical caves, warm hospitality, elegant estates and old plantations, spectacular autumn foliage, and 400 years of history that shaped the character of America. Join us now as we journey along the old wilderness road westward from a wild Atlantic shore to the banks of Old Man River and a truly magnificent historic land. Captain John Smith called it a fruitful and delightful land. Thomas Jefferson, the Eden of our country. John Brown, a savage and bloody land. Each in his own time was describing the Old Dominion, Virginia, the first American colony, the 10th American state. For the history buff, Virginia is a grand stage upon which the great pageant of America unfolds. The past is well preserved here in the parks and battlefields that dot the countryside, and in the heroes that shaped our country. There are, in fact, over 1,500 historic sites in Virginia, more than any other state in the Union. While your tour of Virginia can begin virtually anywhere, ours begins at the beginning. This is Cape Henry, just north of the present-day Virginia Beach. On May 13th in 1607, 104 English colonists landed here. It was the start of an adventure that would eventually lead to the founding of a nation, to a great civil war, and to the conquest of the western wilderness that these Virginia colonists could not even imagine. This memorial honors that day and marks the spot. Although the Virginia colonists landed first on Cape Henry, they settled here on what was once the banks of the James River. They named both the river and their settlement after their English king, James I. Today, Jamestown is an island, and nothing remains of the original town except for the outlines of a few streets, fences, and foundations. Even so, you can still experience life as it was in 1607 by visiting Jamestown's settlement. Built in 1957 to commemorate the 350th anniversary of the founding of Jamestown, the museum has reconstructed James Fort, which was home to the first colonists, a Powhatan Indian village, and full-scale reproductions of the Godspeed, the Susan Constant, and the Discovery, the 3 ships that brought colonists to Virginia. Despite the mosquitoes and diseases bred by the damp, swampy land, Jamestown thrived as the capital of the Virginia colony for nearly 90 years. Eventually, in 1699, the capital was moved inland to a place called Middle Plantation, which was quickly renamed Williamsburg in honor of King William III. One mile long and nearly a half-mile wide, Colonial Williamsburg is today the largest 18th century town in America. Privately owned, the restoration of Williamsburg began in 1926 with the enthusiastic financial support of John D. Rockefeller, Jr. Although restoration continues to this day, 85% of the original city has been returned to its colonial splendor. Williamsburg was the center of social and political life in colonial Virginia for some 81 years. It might have become the state capital as well, had it not been for Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, was, ironically, one of Virginia's last colonial governors. He ordered the capital moved to Richmond in 1780 when Williamsburg came under the threat of a British attack. Perhaps he should have waited. For the war ended less than a year later, only 12 miles from Williamsburg, here at Yorktown on October 19, 1781. That was the day that British commander Lord Cornwallis, besieged by American and French land forces and cut off from escaping by sea by the French fleet, surrendered his army to General George Washington. Today, the story of the siege of Yorktown is told through markers and displays along two self-guided auto tours of the battlefield. Finally, before leaving the cradle of the nation, we suggest that you visit Carter's Grove Plantation. It's only 8 miles southeast of Williamsburg. Built in the 1750s along the banks of the James River, Carter's Grove Plantation was the breadbasket of colonial Williamsburg. Originally owned by Robert King Carter, the estate once encompassed 300,000 acres and was worked by 1,000 slaves. Virginia Beach, just south of Cape Henry, is a popular resort town with over 12 miles of public beaches. But just over 100 years ago, it was a barren, windswept, desolate land. In fact, so many ships sank off its treacherous coast that these cold Atlantic waters were known as the graveyard of lost ships. Today, the Atlantic Ocean and Chesapeake Bay are the primary focus of the Virginia Marine Science Museum. Here, exhibits inside and out help visitors explore the mysteries of the marine environment and the interaction of nature and man and the sea. Man and the sea are also the subject of the famed Mariners Museum in Newport News. Located in a 550-acre wildlife sanctuary, the museum contains one of the finest collections of historic art and artifacts from America's maritime past, as well as a large display of small watercraft. Less than 50 miles northwest of colonial Williamsburg and the historic Virginia Peninsula, at the very head of the James River, is Richmond, the state capital. From its founding in 1609 by Captain John Smith, Richmond has played an important role in the making and nearly unmaking of the United States. It was here in 1775 at the St. John's Church that Patrick Henry fueled the Revolutionary War with his call to "Give me liberty or give me death." And it was here in April 1861, at the start of the Civil War, that Virginia seceded from the Union, and Richmond became the capital of the Southern Confederacy. The Capitol itself was designed and built by Virginia's first Renaissance man, Thomas Jefferson. He modeled the building after La Maison Carrée, an ancient Roman temple in France. The center was completed in 1788, the wings added in 1906. It was here, in the old hall of the House of Delegates, that Aaron Burr was tried for treason, that Robert E. Lee received his commission as the commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, and that the Confederate Congress met during the Civil War. Over 4 years of war, Union forces made 7 attempts, all unsuccessful, to seize the city, and the man who lived in this house, Jefferson Davis. Today, it's called the White House of the Confederacy, and it's part of Richmond's most popular attraction, the Museum of the Confederacy. The museum commemorates the short-lived Confederacy and holds the nation's largest collection of Confederate artifacts. Among Richmond's other fine museums, of particular note are the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, the Virginia Historical Society, the Edgar Allan Poe Museum, and the Valentine Museum, which is also known as the Museum of the Life and History of Richmond. More than 60% of the Civil War was fought on Virginia soil, so Fredericksburg, like Richmond, is surrounded by battlefields. During the Civil War, located as it was halfway between Washington and Richmond, the city was at the very center of 4 savage battles: Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, the Wilderness, and Spotsylvania Courthouse. Today, a part of each of those 4 battlefields makes up the 6,000-acre Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park. Between December 1862 and May 1864, over 100,000 Union and Confederate soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing on these fields of glory. Included in the park is the Fredericksburg National Cemetery. Next to the White House in Washington, D.C., the most cherished home in America is Mount Vernon. Situated at the southern end of the George Washington Parkway, this magnificent estate was the home and the burial place of George and Martha Washington. Washington's father, Augustine, bought the land and began to build the house in 1735, when it was known as Little Hunting Creek Plantation. When Washington's older half-brother, Lawrence, died in 1752, George inherited the plantation. George enlarged and improved the estate to its present size and beauty, and renamed it Mount Vernon. Today, Mount Vernon is still privately owned and the tomb of Washington and his beloved wife, Martha. West of the Piedmont Plateau, the Appalachian Mountains rise up like the great blue barrier they once were. Here, the Blue Ridge Mountains, with their deep timbered hollows and cascading streams, run south for nearly 470 miles into North Carolina. The Potomac and Shenandoah rivers flow gently through the great valleys that they carved out eons ago. Running along the crest of the Blue Ridge Mountains for nearly 500 miles is one of the most scenic highways in America, the Blue Ridge Parkway. Originally, this was the route of the Appalachian Trail. But when the highway was built, the trail was shifted, and it now passes through the national forests that border the drive. The national park extends along the Blue Ridge Mountains for 80 miles from Front Royal south to Waynesboro. It offers visitors 193,000 acres, some 300 square miles of accessible, scenic, and unspoiled wilderness. Once this was the land of the Shawnee, who called the mountains and the river valley Shenandoah, meaning daughter of the stars. For here are peaks that rise more than 4,000 feet, deep timbered hollows and cascading streams, and 1,000 varieties of plants and animals. Today, there are also hundreds of miles of horseback and hiking trails, including 94 miles of the Appalachian Trail. While Albemarle County may be known for its peach and apple orchards, its horse farms, and classic fox hunts, it's probably best known as the home of the University of Virginia and the birthplace of Thomas Jefferson. Born in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains on April 13, 1743, Thomas Jefferson spent most of his life designing and building first a nation, then a home. He called the nation the United States of America. He called his home Monticello. Jefferson began to build his mountaintop estate in 1769 at the very start of his political career. 40 years later, after many alterations and additions, he finished it, just as he retired from public life. In a way, Monticello is a summation of Jefferson's life. The house reflects his love of classic art and architecture, his imagination and inventiveness, and his insatiable curiosity about the world around him. Ironically, Jefferson died here on July 4, 1826, exactly 50 years to the day after the Continental Congress adopted his Declaration of Independence. After Jefferson retired from politics in 1809, he turned his attention to his first great love, the arts and sciences, and devoted the rest of his life to establishing the University of Virginia here in Charlottesville. Construction began on the stately rotunda and on the student ranges, both designed by Jefferson, in October of 1817. The university's first board of governors included Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe. Both Edgar Allan Poe and Woodrow Wilson were students here. Before leaving the Charlottesville area, be sure to visit historic Mitchie Tavern, which offers visitors a rare look back at one of the social centers of life in the 18th century, and Ash Lawn Highland, the 1799 535-acre tobacco plantation once owned by James Monroe. Both are only a few miles from Monticello and downtown Charlottesville. About 60 miles south of Charlottesville is Appomattox Courthouse. It was here, after 4 years of bloody conflict, that the Civil War ended. The date was April 9, 1865, Palm Sunday. On that afternoon, in the parlor of Wilmer McLean's house, General Robert E. Lee surrendered what was left of the Army of Northern Virginia to General Ulysses S. Grant. Today, Appomattox Courthouse is a 1,326-acre National Historic Site operated by the National Park Service. The original McLean house was torn down in 1892, so this house, as well as the other 26 buildings that make up the village, are all reconstructions or restorations. Even so, as you walk through the village and view the memorial tablets that mark the locations of Lee and Grant's headquarters, the site of the last shots fired by Confederate forces, and the field where the defeated Army of Northern Virginia furled its battle flags and laid down its arms, you'll feel like you are there again on that historic day in April 1865. On US 11 at State Route 130, there is a limestone arch spanning Cedar Creek. The arch is 215 feet high, 90 feet long, 50 to 150 feet wide, and hundreds of thousands of years old. 300 years ago, to the local Indians, it was the Bridge of God. But to George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who knew it well, it was simply Virginia's natural bridge. Today, Natural Bridge, which cannot be seen from the highway, is open every day from dawn to dusk. In 1861, when Virginia seceded from the Union, her western counties promptly seceded from Virginia. The western counties, which represented 1/3 of the state, opted to stay in the Union, and in 1863 they became West Virginia, our 35th state. West Virginia has always been a little more independent than any of the other Appalachian states. A lot of that has to do with the people who settled here on hardscrabble farms, in the coal towns, and in the craggy hollows and hidden valleys of the Allegheny Mountains. They were mostly Scotch-Irish and German pioneers from Pennsylvania and Maryland. A lot had to do, too, with the mountains themselves, for they are the heart and soul of West Virginia. In the past, coal and lumber were king. Today, the future of West Virginia lies in her natural beauty, in tourism, and perhaps even in the stars. For here you'll find a wonderful array of attractions to explore and experience. Not far from Peters Mountains, where the Appalachian Trail skirts the West Virginia state line, is the sleepy river town of Harper's Ferry. The town sits at the confluence of the Shenandoah and Potomac rivers. On the night of October 16, 1859, the town was awakened by the thunder of men on horseback. It was John Brown and his band of fanatical abolitionists. That night, they rode into Harper's Ferry and captured the Federal Armory. For months, John Brown had encouraged slaves throughout the South to revolt. Now he planned to arm them with weapons from the captured arsenal. But his plan quickly went amiss. On the morning of October 18th, 2 days after the bloodshed, Brown and his men were captured by a contingent of U.S. Marines led by Colonel Robert E. Lee. Eventually, John Brown and 6 of his followers were tried for treason, convicted, and hanged on December 2, 1859, in nearby Charlestown. A few years later, Harper's Ferry became a battleground of the Civil War, the town changing hands several times. Today, the old Armory Firehouse, the building in which John Brown made his last stand, is known as John Brown's Fort and is a part of the 2,500-acre Harper's Ferry National Historic Park. The view from the heights above the town is as spectacular today as it was the day Thomas Jefferson stood on Balancing Rock and pronounced it to be one of the stupendous views of nature. One need not travel far along the highways and byways of the Mountain State to know that West Virginia has an abundance of stupendous views. For 100 miles from Petersburg south to Richwood, the 901,000-acre Monongahela National Forest lays like a green blanket upon the mountains. Here, State Route 28 and 55 traverses the forest and the mountains on a northwest to southwest direction and provides travelers with easy access to many of West Virginia's best attractions. In the northwest corner of the Monongahela National Forest, about a quarter-mile southwest of Davis, is Blackwater Falls State Park, where a 63-foot-high waterfall tumbles into a deep river gorge. Surrounding the falls are nature trails and a park with facilities for picnicking and camping, swimming and fishing and boating, hiking and horseback riding. 2 exceptionally scenic recreational areas are Spruce Knob and Seneca Rocks. At 4,863 feet, Spruce Knob is the highest point in West Virginia. While there is an observation tower and a nature trail at the summit, the forest road that leads to the summit is rather primitive, so caution is advised. The whole area around the town of Seneca Rocks is considered a rock climber's paradise. At 900 feet, the precipice from which the town and the area takes its name may not be the highest or even the most dangerous in West Virginia, but it has challenged climbers for centuries. It even has its own Indian legend, which you can learn about by visiting the Seneca Rocks Visitor Center. Further south along State Route 2855 in the shadow of Cheat Mountain are the towns of Cass and Greenbank. By road map, they're only about 4 miles apart, and yet, while one glories in its past, the other peers light years into the future. Cass, population about 100, was once a lumber town and a major contributor to West Virginia's pulp and paper industries. Today, the town's main industry is tourism. People come here to enjoy the mountains and to ride the Cass Scenic Railroad. Instead of hauling logging trains up and down Cheat Mountain as they once did, these old steam shay locomotives now haul passenger cars on a 2-hour run to Whitaker Station 3 times a day. Visitors can also take a 4.5-hour, 22-mile trip to the top of Bald Knob. And in October, the railroad operates special fall color runs. While the sounds that echo in Cass Valley are obviously made by these down-to-earth old steam engines, the sounds that echo in nearby Deer Creek Valley are, quite literally, from out of this world. For this is Greenbank, the home of the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, where one can listen to the stars and ponder the mysteries of the universe. The mission of the observatory is to study celestial bodies in our galaxy by examining the radio energy that they emit or reflect. Astronomers do that by training these huge dishpan-shaped antennas, called radio telescopes, on specific points in the sky and collecting radio signals. The data these telescopes collect will help unlock the secrets of the stars. One man who knew the stars well was America's foremost frontiersman, Daniel Boone. From 1788 to 1795, he lived on the banks of the Kanawha River, just across from the present-day Charleston, West Virginia's capital. Of course, back then, this was still wilderness and still the state of Virginia. Today, Charleston is the center of the state's glass and chemical industries, home of West Virginia State College and the University of Charleston, and well known for its many cultural events, everything from a state jazz festival to a sternwheel regatta. Many of these events are held at the Cultural Center, which doubles as a state archives and museum, featuring exhibits on John Brown and the Civil War, and on the grounds of West Virginia's impressive state capitol, which is the work of architect Cass Gilbert. One place in West Virginia where Daniel Boone might still feel at home is on the New River. Formed some 65 million years ago, the New River is actually one of the oldest rivers in North America. It's also one of the few rivers in the world that flows north. For years, parts of the river and its gorge were so dangerous and unpassable that no one lived here. But then, in 1873, the C&O Railroad built a line through New River Gorge, and for the next 80 years hauled coal out of the nearby mines. When the mines played out, so did the mining towns that had clung precariously to the hillsides, and the gorge once again became a wilderness. Today, a 52-mile-long section of the New River Gorge from Hinton to Fayetteville has been designated a national river, with the same mandates of preservation and public access as a national park. Almost as soon as Jamestown was founded, explorers and settlers had pushed westward, across the Piedmont to the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. And there they stopped. The mountains appeared virtually impassable. What lay beyond the mountains was anyone's guess, but many a pioneer came to believe it was a legendary land called Kentucky. How right they were, for Kentucky then and Kentucky now is a land of legends. The trail across the Appalachians and through the Cumberland Gap into Kentucky was well known to migratory animals and local Indians. But it wasn't until April 1750 that the first European, a Virginian named Dr. Thomas Walker, stumbled upon it. In 1769, Daniel Boone explored the Gap, then returned in 1775 with an army of 30 axemen and blazed a 208-mile-long trail through the Gap into Kentucky. Today, you can still follow Boone's Wilderness Road. It's now U.S. Highways 58 and 25E, and they cut right across Cumberland Gap National Historic Park. The park, covering some 20,080 acres, is almost as primitive and wild as it was in the days of Daniel Boone. From Pinnacle Overlook, the highest point in the park, you can get a spectacular view of Cumberland Gap itself, the Appalachian Mountains, and parts of 3 states, Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee. After the Revolutionary War, thousands of Westerners poured into Kentucky seeking land, fortune, and adventure. When the Shakers arrived in 1805, they too sought land, but not for profit. They sought a place where they could live in tranquility and harmony with nature and practice their religious beliefs. They found that place in Pleasant Hill, a rural village in the heart of Bluegrass country, 25 miles southwest of Lexington. Today, the 2,700-acre Shaker village of Pleasant Hill is a National Historic Landmark. It's also a living history museum, preserving 30 original 19th century buildings and providing insights into one of America's most successful communal religious societies. To most visitors, this rolling farmland in south-central Kentucky looks mighty green, and it is, except in late May when it first blooms. Then, in the early morning sunshine, it gives off a bluish tint and earns its legendary name, Bluegrass. Today, the 1,200 square mile region is well known for its burley tobacco, its bourbon whiskey, its thoroughbred horses, and its southern hospitality. The heart of the Bluegrass is Lexington, Kentucky's second largest city. Founded in 1799, the city was named after the Battle of Lexington. Though cosmopolitan, worldly, and a center of business, Lexington still manages to feel like a small southern town. Of special interest is this Georgian-style home at 578 Main Street. It was built in 1803 and was the girlhood home of Mary Todd, the wife of President Abraham Lincoln. Today, the house has been completely restored and furnished in the period of the Civil War. Inside, you'll find personal articles from the Lincoln-Todd families. With Lexington surrounded by some of the world's most celebrated and richest horse farms, it's appropriate that one of the area's main attractions is a park and museum devoted to the horse. It's called the Kentucky Horse Park, and it's located about 10 miles north of Lexington, just off Interstate 75. Inside the 1,032-acre park, you'll find the International Museum of the Horse, which traces the history of all breeds. The American Saddle Horse Museum, which celebrates today's performance horse, Kentucky's only native breed, and the monument and grave of the legendary thoroughbred Man of War. Bluegrass country has been the center of horse breeding, rearing, and training ever since the 1770s, when the first thoroughbreds were brought to Kentucky from Virginia. When the first racetrack was built in 1798, the sport of kings became a year-round business. Today, the most famous horse race in America, the Kentucky Derby, is run each year on the first Saturday in May here at Churchill Downs in Louisville. First run in 1875, the Derby pits the best 3-year-old thoroughbreds in the world in a 1.25-mile race for a purse of more than $600,000. While walking tours of Churchill Downs are available, you should also plan to visit the Kentucky Derby Museum. Its racing memorabilia, media show, and hands-on exhibits chronicle the entire history of the Derby and the thoroughbred horse racing industry. But there's a lot more to Louisville, Kentucky's largest city, than just horse racing. It is, among other things, the home of the Louisville Slugger, the world's finest baseball bat, the world-renowned Louisville Orchestra, Opera, and Ballet, and the producer of half the world's supply of bourbon whiskey. Everything from an elegant steamboat, the Belle of Louisville, to a museum devoted to fried chicken. Located on Main Street, only a few blocks from the Ohio River, the Museum of Science and History occupies a wonderful old building with a central atrium 5 stories high. While the focus of the museum is the history of Kentucky and the Ohio River Valley, it also features exhibits as diverse as artifacts from ancient Egypt and a space capsule that went to the moon. The J.B. Speed Art Museum is housed in this neoclassical building next to the University of Louisville. Founded in 1925 by Mrs. Hattie Bishop Speed, it was the first art museum in Kentucky. Today, with a collection that includes paintings and sculpture by both modern artists and old masters, as well as tapestries, furniture, decorative art, and art by American Indians, it's also the largest art museum in the state. Now, if you're wondering who John Speed was, we suggest you drive over to Farmington and find out. It's located just on the outskirts of town. Working from plans drawn by his friend Thomas Jefferson, John Speed built this 14-room late Federal-style house in 1810. Of special interest inside the house are the enclosed staircase, the twin octagonal rooms, and the furnishings, which are all pre-1820 antiques. The original deed to the land, signed by Patrick Henry, hangs on the wall. Finally, before leaving the Louisville area, take the time to visit an old soldier. Stop at the plantation that George Rogers Clark called Locust Grove. Set on 55 rolling acres, this handsome Georgian-style mansion, built about 1790, was the retirement home of General George Rogers Clark. The general bought Locust Grove in 1809 and lived here until his death in 1818 at age 65. The house has been restored and furnished in the period. It's been a tradition in America that small towns, like this one, Hoganville, Kentucky, population 2,500, erect a statue in the town square. It's usually a statue of the town founder, a statesman, or a military hero. Here in Hoganville, it's in honor of the local boy who made good, Abe Lincoln, 16th President of the United States. Lincoln was born on Sinking Spring Farm, 3 miles south of Hoganville, on February 12, 1809. Today, 110 acres of the Lincoln farm and the log cabin in which Lincoln is believed to have been born have been preserved and enshrined as the Abraham Lincoln Birthplace National Historic Site. The cabin itself is protected by a memorial built in 1911. To reach the memorial, visitors climb 56 marble steps, one for each year that Lincoln celebrated life. Like much of west central Kentucky, the Lincoln farm sits on a rocky base of porous limestone. Even the farm's name, Sinking Spring, referred to a limestone spring that frequently disappeared. So it's not surprising that Mammoth Cave, Kentucky's only national park, is only 50 miles southwest of Lincoln's birthplace. Like virtually all limestone caves, Mammoth Cave was formed over eons by the seepage of groundwater and the flow of streams through the rock. Today, with more than 300 miles of underground passages on 5 different levels, Mammoth Cave is one of the longest cave systems in the world. Although the first official record of Mammoth Cave, a deed to the land, dates from 1798, archaeological evidence suggests that the cave was being used by humans some 4,000 years ago. Since then, the cave has been mined for its saltpeter, one of the components of gunpowder, and has been used as a tuberculosis sanitarium. It became a national park in 1941. Today, Park Service tours of Mammoth Cave range in length from 1.5 to 6 hours. Above the cave, the Green River, a scenic tributary of the Ohio River, meanders through the rugged 52,000-acre park. You can get an appreciation of the river and its forest wildlife by hiking the wooded trails along the river's bluffs, ridges, and valleys. When the Appalachian Trail leaves Virginia, it enters the Cherokee National Forest of northeastern Tennessee. It then skirts along the Tennessee-North Carolina border and cuts straight through the Great Smoky Mountains before crossing the southwestern tip of North Carolina to end in Georgia. From the Great Smoky Mountains, Tennessee extends westward across a plateau of rolling hills and bluegrass, 480 miles to the muddy banks of the Mississippi River. It takes its name from a Cherokee Indian village that once stood on the Little Tennessee River. Once a part of North Carolina, it became our 16th state in 1796. Today, Tennessee is crisscrossed with superhighways and country roads that carry commerce to all corners of the state, and which beckon and welcome all travelers to come and explore the past, the present, and the future. This is Nashville, the capital of Tennessee. It was founded on the west bank of the Cumberland River on Christmas Day, 1779, and named in honor of Francis Nash, a general in the Revolutionary War. Today, it's a modern and culturally sophisticated city, a city that takes great pride in its history, its people, its gracious old homes, and old Southern traditions. It's also a city rich in history. This is the Hermitage, the home of Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States. Although he was born in South Carolina in 1767, Andrew Jackson grew up on the Tennessee frontier. He entered American politics in 1796, became a national hero during the War of 1812, and in 1828, the first U.S. president to be elected from west of the Appalachian Mountains. When Jackson purchased this 635-acre estate in 1804, there was nothing here but a group of log cabins. He didn't get around to building the Hermitage until 1821, then had to rebuild it in 1834 after part of the original house was destroyed by fire. After serving 2 terms as President of the United States, Old Hickory retired from American politics. He died at the Hermitage on June 8, 1845, at the age of 78, and is buried in his garden next to his beloved wife, Rachel. Although the country music business is only the 4th largest industry in Nashville, behind insurance, banking, and printing, the city will always be the country music capital of the world, and the Grand Ole Opry will always be first in the hearts of country western music fans. When the Grand Ole Opry began broadcasting on radio in 1925, it was known as the WSM Barn Dance. Today, it's the longest-running radio show in the United States. It continues to broadcast the best in country western music every Friday and Saturday night from the Grand Ole Opry House, a multi-million-dollar studio located here at Opryland, USA. Only 15 minutes northeast of downtown Nashville, Opryland, USA is an entertainment complex that includes the Grand Ole Opry, Opryland Theme Park, and the riverboat General Jackson. Nowhere but in Nashville will you find a theme park quite like Opryland. Covering over 120 acres, it's part craft show, part thrill show, and all music show.
190 miles an hour, taking 30 feet a jump. Never been caught, he ain't never been treed. Some folks say he looks a lot like me.
Located along Music Row in downtown Nashville, the Country Music Hall of Fame honors country music's legendary songwriters and singers. On display are memorabilia of the Grand Ole Opry, and costumes, films, musical instruments, records, and personal items of country music stars. Although Elvis Presley was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, he lived most of his life in Memphis, Tennessee, and died here in 1977 at his estate, known to fans around the world as Graceland. Today, guided tours of the 15,000-square-foot mansion allow the curious and the true believers to tour his home and to see his grave. Long before Elvis sang of hound dogs and blue suede shoes, there was another kind of music that sprang up from the soul of Memphis. It was born at the turn of the century along tawdry Beale Street, and the people called it blues. It was virtually the creation of one man, W.C. Handy. Today, this city park is named after him, and there's even a statue. But it's his music, the St. Louis Blues, the Memphis Blues, the Beale Street Blues, not his name, that most people know and remember. Still, if you'd like to learn more about the father of the blues, we suggest that you visit the W.C. Handy Museum. It's at 352 Beale Street, and it's where W.C. Handy lived and wrote much of his music.
Thank you. Yeah, what goes on in the dark will soon come to light. You see that?
Although Chickasaw Indians, Spanish, French, and British explorers all found their way down the Wolf River to the muddy Mississippi, it wasn't until 1819 that Memphis was founded. It was named after an Egyptian city on the Nile. Today, Memphis, which means place of good abode, has a population of over 650,000 and is Tennessee's largest city. Since its founding, the Mississippi River has been the lifeblood of the city. Even though Memphis is 700 miles north of New Orleans, it is still an important and active inland port, shipping over 12 million tons of river cargo each year. Ever since the War of 1812, when Tennessee earned its nickname, the Volunteer State, Tennesseans have fought in all of America's wars, but none as close to the heart and home as our own Civil War. This is Shiloh National Military Park, about 100 miles east of Memphis and 10 miles south of Savannah, Tennessee. Here, on April 6th and 7th, 1862, more than 100,000 Union and Confederate soldiers, most of them untested raw recruits, fought a two-day battle at Shiloh Church and Pittsburgh Landing. It was the first major Civil War battle in the West. When the guns were silent and the smoke of the battle had cleared, over 24,000 were dead, wounded, or missing. The Union victory at Shiloh forced the Confederates to retreat to Corinth, Mississippi, and paved the way for General Grant's successful siege of Vicksburg. Today, a well-defined 10-mile-long auto tour allows park visitors to leisurely relive the Battle of Shiloh and explore the park's well-preserved Indian mounds. Still further east, along the Tennessee-Georgia border, Union and Confederate forces collided again, this time in a 3-month-long battle for Chattanooga. Surrounded by mountains on three sides, Chattanooga's very name is a Cherokee word meaning rock coming to a point, and that rock can only be reached by the 2,126-foot-high Lookout Mountain. Chattanooga began as a trading post in 1815, but by the time of the Civil War, the city was a strategic railway center. The battle for control of Chattanooga began on September 19, 1863, at Chickamauga Creek. It ended with the defeat of the Confederate forces on Lookout Mountain on November 24th, and on Missionary Ridge on November 25th. Today, those three battles are commemorated and the battlefields preserved within the 8,113 acres of the Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. The largest section of the park, the Chickamauga Battlefield, is in Georgia, while the Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge battlefields are in Tennessee. Although tours of the battlefield are self-guided, you won't get lost. There are over 1,800 markers, monuments, cannons, and tablets that mark unit positions and the ever-changing lines of battle. Billing itself as America's most amazing mile, the tracks of the railway climb straight up the face of the mountain. At 8 miles per hour, a one-way ride on the steepest incline railway in the world takes about 20 minutes. From Point Park, on top of the mountain, you'll have a spectacular view of Chattanooga and of the Moccasin Bend in the Tennessee River. You'll also be able to learn why the battle for Lookout Mountain was called the Battle in the Sky. While on the mountain, you can also visit Rock City Gardens, a 10-acre park where you can wander through natural sandstone formations, cross a swinging bridge over a deep chasm, and visit observation points that afford scenic views of 7 states. "22 miles west of Knoxville is Oak Ridge, Tennessee, once one of the most secret places on Earth. Built from scratch during World War II, it was here that scientists and technicians working for the top-secret Manhattan Project developed the process for producing uranium-235, which was used in the world's first atomic bombs. Although many of the research facilities at Oak Ridge are still off-limits to the public, visitors can tour the general area by car and visit the American Museum of Science and Energy. Sponsored by the U.S. Department of Energy, the museum houses one of the world's largest exhibits on natural and man-made forms of energy. More than 200 exhibits trace the history, the uses, and the future of energy sources, everything from fossil fuels to sunlight. Sunlight and rain are about all that's needed to power this part of Tennessee, for these are the Great Smoky Mountains. While there is still some debate as to what creates the smoky haze that gives the mountains their name, one theory is that it's simply a combination of water vapor and oil from the leaves of the mountain's forests. There is no debate, however, as to the mountain's enchanting beauty. In fact, Great Smoky Mountains National Park is the most popular national park on the East Coast, playing host to more than 8 million visitors each year. 60 miles long and 20 miles wide, the national park covers some 520,000 acres, roughly 800 square miles, of mountains and forests divided almost equally between Tennessee and North Carolina. From Tennessee, the main entrance to the park is through the resort town of Gatlinburg. When the park was established in 1934, wildlife had almost disappeared. Today, after years of prohibiting hunting, the forests are once again alive with bear, ruffed grouse, turkey, and deer, which are quite common in Cades Cove. Cades Cove, one of the park's most scenic areas, is actually an outdoor museum. Here, time has stopped, and the past still lives. The mountain people who once made their homes in the cove seem to live again. They reach out and touch us, and teach us about the long-forgotten ways of the past. To fully enjoy Cades Cove, simply follow the 11-mile scenic road that circles the cove. While the national park has more than 170 miles of scenic roads, by far the most traveled is Newfound Gap Road. The road bisects the park east to west and winds its way up the mountains to Newfound Gap. From there, a 7-mile spur road and then a half-mile trail will get you to the highest point in the park, Clingman's Dome. At 6,643 feet, Clingman's Dome is also the highest point in the state of Tennessee. From here, on a clear day, you can see 16 peaks that exceed 6,000 feet, and hundreds of miles in all directions. And somewhere down there is the Appalachian Trail, still winding its way south to Georgia. Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, 4 states sharing a common history and a common bond. So much alike, and yet so different. We hope that this brief video tour of the Appalachian Trail states has informed, enlightened, and even inspired you to follow your own trail across this vast vacation land and discover for yourself where our nation was founded and our union forged in the blood of the Civil War, where America found a voice in the music of the mountains, the Bluegrass, and the great Mississippi River, and where the past, as has always been, but a prologue to the future. To make your vacation as enjoyable as possible, plan ahead. And be sure to contact your AAA office for current and detailed information on travel routes, accommodations, places to eat, and the attractions you want to visit. Happy traveling!